The Adventure of the Christmas Pudding by Agatha Christie. Part 4. Need that Swedish? Part 4. Christmas dinner took place at 2 p.m. and was a feast indeed. Enormous logs crackled merrily in the wide fireplace, and above their crackling rose the babble of many tongues talking together. They spelled babble wrong, didn't they? I think. Anyway, oyster soup had been consumed. 2 enormous turkeys had come and gone, mere carcasses of their former selves. Now, the supreme moment, the Christmas pudding was brought in state. Like, with much pomp, in state. Old Peverell, his hands and his knees shaking with the weakness of 80 years, permitted no one but himself to bear it in. Mrs. Lacey sat, her hands pressed together, in nervous apprehension. One Christmas, she felt sure, Peverell would fall down dead, having either to take the risk of letting him fall down dead or of hurting his feelings to such an extent that he would probably prefer to be dead than alive. She had so far chosen the former alternative. So she keeps letting him serve the heavy Christmas pudding, even though he's in his 80s and is shaking. On a silver dish, the Christmas pudding reposed in its glory. A large football of a pudding, a piece of holly stuck in it like a triumphant flag, and glorious flames of blue and red rising round it. There was a cheer and cries of "Ooh! Ah!" One thing Mrs. Lacey had done, prevailed upon Peverell to place the pudding in front of her, so that she could help it, rather than hand it in turn round the table, so she would be the one serving it up. She breathed a sigh of relief as it was deposited safely in front of her. Rapidly the plates were passed around, flames still licking the portions. "Wish, Monsieur Poirot!" cried Bridget. "Wish before the flame goes! Quick, granddarling, quick!" Mrs. Lacey leaned back with a sigh of satisfaction. Operation Pudding had been a success. In front of everyone was a helping, with flames still licking it. There was a momentary silence all round the table as everyone wished hard. Now this is a British tradition that I have no idea about. I'm reading to you about a British Christmas right now. I'm American. Stupid American. But my Christmas traditions are also lovely. Anyway, there was nobody to notice the rather curious expression on the face of Monsieur Poirot as he surveyed the portion of pudding on his plate. "Don't eat none of the plum pudding." That was the note. What on earth did that sinister warning mean? There could be nothing different about his portion of plum pudding from that of everyone else. Sighing, he admitted himself baffled, and Hercule Poirot never liked to admit himself baffled, because he's such a brilliant detective. He picked up his spoon and fork. "Hard sauce, Monsieur Poirot?" Poirot helped himself appreciatively to hard sauce. Now I had to look this up because, like I said, we don't have this plum pudding tradition in my home, and I guess hard sauce is made from butter and sugar and also brandy or rum and vanilla. So it's just like a really sweet sauce that you put on the plum pudding, Christmas pudding. "Swipe my best brandy again, eh, said the Colonel good-humouredly from the other end of the table. Mrs. Lacey twinkled at him. "Mrs. Ross insists on having the best brandy, dear," she said. "She says it makes all the difference." "Well, well," said Colonel Lacey. "Christmas comes but once a year, and Mrs. Ross is a great woman and a great cook." So she took the best brandy for the hard sauce, like the high-quality brandy. "She is indeed," said Colin. "Smashing plum pudding, this." He filled an appreciative mouth. Gently, almost gingerly, Hercule Poirot attacked his portion of the pudding. He ate a mouthful. It was delicious. He ate another. Something tinkled faintly on his plate. He investigated with a fork. Bridget, on his left, came to his aid. "You've got something, Monsieur Poirot," she said. "I wonder what it is." Poirot detached a little silver object from the surrounding raisins that clung to it. "Ooh," said Bridget. "It's the bachelor's button. Monsieur Poirot's got the bachelor's button." Hercule Poirot dipped the small silver button into the finger glass of water that stood by his plate, and washed it clear of pudding crumbs. "It is very pretty," he observed. "That means you're going to be a bachelor, Monsieur Poirot," explained Colin helpfully. "That is to be expected," said Poirot gravely. "I have been a bachelor for many long years, and it is unlikely that I shall change that status now." "Oh, never say die," said Michael. "I saw in the paper that someone of 95 married a girl of 22 the other day." "You encourage me," said Hercule Poirot. I just imagine Poirot being this kind of clever, older French gentleman who's kind of a little bit sarcastic, but nice. Funny and nice. Colonel Lacey uttered a sudden exclamation. His face became purple, and his hand went to his mouth. "Confound it, Emmeline!" he roared. "Why on earth do you let the cook put glass in the pudding?" "Glass!" cried Mrs. Lacey, astonished. Colonel Lacey withdrew the offending substance from his mouth. "Might have broken a tooth," he grumbled. "Or swallowed the damn thing and had appendicitis." Appendicitis. Should I make him more posh or more cockney? I don't know. Probably posh. He dropped the piece of glass into the finger bowl, rinsed it, and held it up. "God bless my soul!" he ejaculated. "It's a red stone out of one of the cracker brooches. He held it aloft. "You permit?" He very deftly, Monsieur Poirot stretched across his neighbour, took it from Colonel Lacey's fingers, and examined it attentively. As the squire had said, it was an enormous red stone, the colour of a ruby. The light gleamed from its facets as he turned it about. Somewhere around the table a chair was pushed sharply back, and then drawn in again. "Phew!" cried Michael. "How whizzed it would be if it was real!" "Perhaps it is real," said Bridget hopefully. "Oh, don't be an ass, Bridget. Why, a ruby of that size would be worth thousands and thousands and thousands of pounds. Wouldn't it, Monsieur Poirot?" "It would indeed," said Poirot. "But what I can't understand," said Mrs. Lacey, "is how it got into the pudding." "Ooh," said Colin, diverted by his last mouthful. "I've got the pig. It isn't fair." Bridget chanted immediately. "Colin's got the pig, Colin's got the pig, Colin is the greedy guzzling pig." "I've got the ring," said Diana in a clear, high voice. "Good for you, Diana. You'll be married first of us all." Remember, she's a widow. "I've got the thimble," wailed Bridget. "Bridget's going to be an old maid," chanted the two boys. "Yeah, Bridget's going to be an old maid." "Who's got the money?" demanded David. "There's a real 10-shilling piece, gold, in this pudding. I know, Mrs. Ross told me so." "I think I'm the lucky one," said Desmond Lee Wortley. Colonel Lacey's two next-door neighbours heard him mutter, "Yes, you would be." "I've got a ring too," said David. He looked across at Diana. "Quite a coincidence, isn't it?" The laughter went on. Nobody noticed that Monsieur Poirot carelessly, as though thinking of something else, had dropped the red stone into his pocket. Mince pies and Christmas dessert followed the pudding. The older members of the party then retired for a welcome siesta before the tea-time ceremony of the lighting of the Christmas tree. Hercule Poirot, however, did not take a siesta. Instead, he made his way to the enormous old-fashioned kitchen. "It is permitted?" he asked, looking round and beaming like smiling brightly, "that I congratulate the cook on this marvellous meal that I have just eaten." There was a moment's pause, and then Mrs. Ross came forward in a stately manner to greet him. She was a large woman, nobly built, with all the dignity of a stage duchess. Two lean, grey-haired women were beyond, in the scullery, washing up, and a tow-haired girl was I think that's blonde, was moving to and fro between the scullery and the kitchen. But these were obviously mere myrmidons. That's like a sort of like a minion, if you will, or like someone who follows someone else, follows the orders of someone else, based on Greek mythology. myrmidons were, they went with Achilles in the conflict with Troy. Conflict, that's the word. Anyway, Mrs. Ross was the queen of the kitchen quarters. "I'm glad to hear you enjoyed it, sir," she said graciously. "Enjoyed it!" cried Hercule Barrot. With an extravagant foreign gesture he raised his hand to his lips, kissed it, and wafted the kiss to the ceiling. "But you are a genius, Mrs. Ross, a genius! Never have I tasted such a wonderful meal. The oyster soup!" He made an expressive noise with his lips. "And the stuffing! The chestnut stuffing in the turkey, that was quite unique in my experience." "Oh, it's funny that you should say that, sir," said Mrs. Ross graciously. "It's a very special recipe, that stuffing. It was given me by an Austrian chef that I worked with many years ago. But all the rest," she added, "is just good plain English cooking." Cooking. "Is there anything better?" demanded Hercule Barrot. "Well, it's nice of you to say so, sir. Of course, you being a foreign gentleman might have preferred the continental style. Not but what I can't manage continental dishes too. I am sure, Mrs. Ross, you could manage anything. But you must know that English cooking, good English cooking, not the cooking one gets in the second-class hotels or the restaurants, is much appreciated by gourmets on the continent, and I believe I am correct in saying that a special expedition was made to London in the early 1800s, and a report sent back to France of the wonders of the English puddings. 'We have nothing like that in France,' they wrote. 'It is worth making a journey to London just to taste the varieties and excellencies of the English puddings. And above all, puddings,' continued Barrot, well launched now on a kind of rhapsody, 'is the Christmas plum pudding such as we have eaten today. That was homemade pudding, was it not? Not a bought one?' 'Yes, indeed, sir, of my own making, and my own recipe such as I've made for many years. When I came here, Mrs. Lacey said that she'd ordered a pudding from London store to save me the trouble. But no, madam, I said, that may be kind of you, but no bought pudding from a store can equal a homemade Christmas one. Mind you," said Mrs. Ross, warming to her subject like the artist she was, "it was made too soon before the day. A good Christmas pudding should be made some weeks before and allowed to wait. The longer they're kept, within reason, the better they are. I mind now that when I was a child and we went to church every Sunday, we'd start listening for the collect that begins, 'Stir up, O Lord, we beseech thee,' because that collect was the signal, as it were, that the puddings should be made that week. And so they always were. We had the collect on the Sunday, and that week, sure enough, my mother would make the Christmas puddings. And so, which should have been here this year, as it was, the pudding was only made 3 days ago, and the day before you arrived, sir. However, I kept the old custom. Everyone in the house had to come into the kitchen and have a stir and make a wish. That's an old custom, sir. I've always held to it." It was hard. I don't know what accent that was. But anyway, did you notice that? So apparently it's a British tradition to have everyone in the family stir the Christmas pudding before cooking it days in advance. So, whoever had this mysterious red stone, whatever it is, slipped it in, because they were afraid or something, when everyone was stirring it. So, this person stirring it, dropped it in. Plop. "Most interesting," said Hercule Poirot, "most interesting. And so everyone came out into the kitchen?" "Yes, sir. The young gentleman, Miss Bridget, and the London gentleman who's staying here, and his sister, and Mr. David, and Miss Diana, Mrs. Middleton, I should say, all had a stir, they did." "How many puddings did you make? Is this the only one?" "No, sir, I made 4. 2 large ones and 2 smaller ones. The other large one I planned to serve on New Year's Day, and the smaller ones were for Colonel and Mrs. Lacey when they're alone like, and not so many in the family." I see, said Barrot. "As a matter of fact, sir," said Mrs. Ross, "it was the wrong pudding you had for lunch today." "The wrong pudding?" Barrot frowned. "How is that?" "Well, sir, we have a big Christmas mould." A mould would be like a form for the pudding. Then it's baked in. A china mold with a pattern of holly and mistletoe on top, and we always have the Christmas Day pudding boiled in that. But there was a most unfortunate accident this morning when Annie was getting it down from the shelf in the larder. She slipped and dropped it and it broke. Well, so naturally I couldn't serve that, could I? There might have been splinters in it, so we had to use the other one, the New Year's Day one, which was in a plain bowl. It makes a nice round, but it's not so decorative as the Christmas mold. Really, where we'll get another mold like that, I don't know. They don't make things in that size nowadays, or tilly bits of things. Why, you can't even buy a breakfast dish that'll take a proper 8 to 10 eggs and bacon. Our things aren't what they were. No, indeed, said Parrot. But today that is not so. This Christmas Day has been like the Christmas days of old. Is that not true? Mrs. Ross sighed. Well, I'm glad you say so, sir, but of course I haven't the help now I used to have. Not skilled help, that is. The girls nowadays, she lowered her voice slightly, they mean very well and they're very willing, but they've not been trained, sir, if you understand what I mean. Times change, yes, said Hercule Poirot. I too find it sad sometimes. This house, sir, said Mrs. Ross, is too large, you know, for the mistress and the colonel. The mistress, she knows that. Living in a corner of it as they do, it's not the same thing at all. It only comes alive, as you might say, at Christmas time when all the family come. It is the first time, I think, that Mr. Lee Watley and his sister have been here. Yes, sir. A note of slight reserve crept into Mrs. Ross's voice. A very nice gentleman he is, but, well, it seems a funny friend for Miss Sarah Dav, according to our ideas. But there, London ways are different. It's sad that his sister's so poorly. Had an operation she had. She seemed all right the first day she was here, but the very day after we'd been stirring the puddings, she was took bad again, and she's been in bed ever since. Got up too soon after her operation, I expect. All doctors nowadays, they have you out of hospital before you can hardly stand on your feet. Why, my very own nephew's wife, and Mrs. Ross went into a long and spirited tale of hospital treatment as accorded to her relations, comparing it unfavorably with the consideration that had been lavished upon them older times. Poirot duly commiserated with her. To commiserate is like to sympathize with. It remains, he said, to thank you for this exquisite and sumptuous meal. Sumptuous is like extravagant, luxurious. You permit a little acknowledgement of my appreciation? A crisp £5 note passed from his hand into that of Mrs. Ross, who said perfunctorily, You really shouldn't do that, sir. I insist. Oh, it's very kind of you indeed, sir. Mrs. Ross accepted the tribute as no more than her due. And I wish you, sir, a very happy Christmas and a prosperous New Year. Very interesting. The plot thickens. So, wonder if it's the Mr. Lee Watley's sister, or if it was Lee Watley, or one of the servants, or one of the kids, or someone, or Diana, the handsome widow, or David, the dull, clean, good guy. You'll find out in the next edition of The Adventure of the Christmas Pudding.